Howdy. Thanks for listening to Let the Movie Speak. Before we get started, we'd like to ask a favor of you.
It's a simple favor. If you could just rate and review our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen, that might help other ears get into our ecosystem here and hear another episode. Anyway, enjoy the show. By 1940, Nazi Germany had invaded and occupied Poland, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, Czechoslovakia, France, Austria, Luxembourg, Denmark, and Lithuania. By 1940, an untold number of Jews had been exterminated in Nazi concentration camps, the full horrors of which would not be globally known until the war's conclusion. And in 1940, Charlie Chaplin, dressed as a parody of Hitler. Later, reflecting on the Great Dictator, Chaplin mused, "One doesn't have to be a Jew to be anti-Nazi. All one has to be is a normal, decent human being."
Let the movie speak.
Welcome, everybody, to our Season 3 premiere. This is our series on the 1940s. This is Let the Movie Speak. My name is Travis.
I am Justin.
Yes. Is that the name of your future memoir?
I'm just reading off the cue card you gave me.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I sent those in the mail. They're 8 by 10 feet. So
Right. It's taking me a what? Can you get smaller ones?
No, you have legendarily bad eyesight, so I figured this would be a help to you.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Anyway, we're here today to kick off our series on the 1940s, which I think we're both stoked about. Justin, are you excited about getting into these 40s films?
Yes, I am.
This bit is going to get better and better with time. Just keep it going.
No, I'm very excited. We have a lot of fun stuff. A lot of stuff I haven't seen before.
Yeah.
Is on the list this season. And excited for kind of the evolution in techniques, in acting styles, whatever that came in the 40s. Excited to dig into it, and I think we've picked a fun movie to kick off the decade with.
Yeah, I think it's, going into this series, we did our little heist series, and that was fun too, but it wasn't time-specific. We got to kind of jump around. This is, I think... maybe for better or for worse, or just in a different way, it is similarly to M, right? Like we saw one of the first speaking films in existence, and this is obviously the first speaking film of a very prolific and famous director. But at the same time, it is like a absolute touchstone in the decade, in the earliness of the decade for different reasons, though.
Right, and it also, has to do, of course, with World War II, like any good movie from the 40s. And we're going to have some interesting discussions, I think, about how the movie approaches that and what it says about that kind of watershed event for human history.
Yeah.
But it definitely, 1940 is not the same as 1945, and not just because I'm really good at math and I can differentiate those numbers, but because by the end of World War II, a lot of maybe that kind of hope that, lingered after this is sounding like a history podcaster now, I'm not trying to do that, but I just think we're going to see in film that certain optimisms, certain worldviews, philosophies, etc., that are invariably in film, because film is created by people with those kind of tenets and worldviews, those have kind of changed and shifted. So I think it'll be interesting to compare even movies from, or like we had a Hitchcock movie in the 30s, right?
Yes.
In the 30 season, and we've got one later up in the decade for this one. So I think it'll be interesting to see how, if at all, some of these worldviews and directing styles, I guess, in Hitchcock's case, might have been influenced by world history.
Yeah, we have a couple returning directors, so like it's like a directorial voice thing, like you're saying, right? They and I think you mentioned in the 30 series, literally Jimmy Stewart's face changes pre and post war for him.
Right.
And you're going to see, you're going to see an evolution there, which is sort of the whole point. It's why I'm excited about this format, because I don't know of another podcast that does it exactly like this. And, you know, we're not film historians, but we are film lovers, and we've seen more films than the average Joe, but I haven't seen, but I think maybe 2 of these from this season. And I think I've only seen The Big Sleep once, like a long time ago. So I don't know. Have you seen many of these or any of these more than once, Justin?
I don't think so. I don't have the list in front of me. That cue card is humongous.
Yeah.
So, I'd have to go out to the garage, you know.
Cool.
Because like you said, this bit just gets better and better.
Yeah.
So
we'll wait. You can go out and
okay. Yeah. Let's take 5.
Okay. No.
I know that I've seen at least one of these movies for sure. That one of the ones I can think of. This has just got to be fascinating to listen to.
Yeah, it's the best.
But like you, I don't have great experience with just about everything on the list. So
cool.
kind of excited.
We're coming in as absolute experts. If you haven't figured that out, we know these movies front to back. We're going to come from a place of scholasticism, and we're just watching them a lot of times for the first time, and hopefully the conversation might make you want to watch one of these things and maybe engage on social media or rate the podcast, whatever. That's the whole point of the show, is to get people, us and yourself, listener, thinking. And before we get into The Great Dictator today, we're going to do, as we always do, which is tell you a little bit about what we watched this week. Well, Justin, I'm going to throw it to you first, and I think we're going to the Marvel corner. Is it still? Yeah.
Yes, I guess just to make sure that we're grounded and just in case there's any hints that we might be a little too big for our britches or hoity-toity, we do like the just the fun popcorn stuff too, because ultimately we may have said it before, we just like film. We just like to see what people are doing. So. Unless it's like really, really bad, we kind of don't really care what the genre is. We just want to see if it has merit of any kind.
There's a sliding scale, because if it gets bad enough, it's good in a different
really
way.
Good. Yeah, exactly, exactly. So I have continued on with the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which as of recording time anyway is still not fully aired. So I've seen the next couple episodes. That would be 2 and 3. And I had hinted, or not hinted, I just said that the first one kind of surprised me in that it started out kind of stupid action-y, and then it started to have some things to say. Mm-hmm. So interestingly, episode 2 continues that tradition and is better, I think, than episode 1. It has some really interesting things to say about race in a way that is that's balanced and handled with a little bit of a deft hand, which is just not something Marvel does with hardly anything,
right?
Because they don't have to in the world that they play in, right? We don't expect that, so it would be silly to demand it from them. But for better or for worse, episode 2 at least has these characters, the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. For example, go and talk to a African American super soldier that is now old and that fought in the Korean War against the Winter Soldier, but he lives like in the ghetto in Philadelphia or somewhere. And he doesn't want to help them because of his whole, he hints that he was imprisoned after the war by the government and then experimented on, and so anyway, it's just an interesting, there's an interesting exchange when Bucky, the Winter Soldier, and when Sam Wilson, the Falcon, exit that guy's house, and Sam is outraged, like, he says, there's a black super soldier, and you never freaking told me? Like, what kind of a crazy, racist, horrible person are you? And Bucky just simply replies, like, he's been through enough. It didn't have anything to do with race. He just said he's been through enough, but what I read between the line there is that that guy has had a hell of a life, literally.
Yeah.
And we don't need to poke the bear anymore. Let him be. So just really interesting stuff they don't really expect from Marvel. And it's not that it's like a full blown, this is not Get Out or something. Okay, yeah. I'm not trying to say it rises to that level, but it's also not trying to. So it's nice though that it's not all trying to be just kick puncher kind of stuff.
Yeah.
There is something really stupid that happens in that second episode where
tell us.
So Bucky is. He, as part of his conditions of release, which only makes sense in the Marvel world where heroes don't have consequences for hardly anything, he has to go to see a psychiatrist and talk about like how he's doing, which just so that leads for some interesting scenes. But if you step back and think about it, it's like no, that would not be a thing. But we can suspend our disbelief, I guess. Anyway. But while they're walking out of that neighborhood that I was talking about, some cops pull up, and there's another little racial thing, right, where the two white cops are like, "Hey, sir, is this guy bothering you?" Because Sam Wilson's black,
right?
And then they're like, "Oh, he's an Avenger. Oh, it's all good." But then they run Bucky, and they're like, "Hey, you're under arrest," and he's like, "Why?" And they say, "You missed a therapy appointment." It's like missing a check-in with your PO, and they just put him in handcuffs. So I don't know, listeners. Hopefully not too many of you have done something where you need a PO, but I don't know what the Marvel Universe's take is on recidivism, but apparently they're just trying to drive that rate way up. So I don't know. I just like to put it out there that if you miss like checking in with somebody once, hopefully you're not going to jail. Because you might have died or something. But.
It sounds like they're at least like circling the sort of interesting conversation around like just like incarceration, right? Like if that character talks about being in prison, and then this is like, yeah, but that's kind of a.
It's pretty hardcore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
okay.
So then you've got the next episode, number 3, which I'll spend a lot less time talking about because it's just not good. But all of the interesting stuff that happened in 1 and 2 doesn't exist in number 3. And it's just I think we're kind of at the breaking point with. This show tries to kind of with its action, because a lot of the time the characters that are conducting the action are just they're supposed to be normal people, i.e. not superpowered. So Sharon Carter comes back. I don't know if you remember her from The Winter Soldier. I think Emily Van Camp played her. She was like Captain America's like neighbor, and then it turns out she's like
I got nothing.
The government. Yeah, well, kind of forgettable. I think I had forgotten about her too till she popped up here. So anyway,
that's part of Marvel's thing though. It's like, remember this person who didn't mean anything? Now they matter,
right.
It's like, okay.
Right. Well, and it's just more of you remember my complaint about WandaVision where unarmed people like try to take on people with fully automatic rifles,
yes,
with their fists,
and mostly successfully, which is annoying.
Right. Yeah. So this similarly happens where Sharon Carter is just like they're trying so hard to say that she's a badass.
Yeah.
That it's just like, okay, there are some rules in our world, right? So even if you're super highly trained, you don't bring a metal pipe to a gunfight unless you absolutely have to, but that's what she does. But then she also shoots people, and I'm not at all like, I have no problem with that character existing. I have no problem with her being a woman, okay? But you can't have somebody that weighs 150 pounds less than their assailant, like take them down with, like spinning kick or something. It's just like the boundaries of reality, like I would buy that if they're like, and she's super powered. Like,
right.
Oh, okay, I guess that's just how it works. But when it's just like, no, she's really well trained. Now the laws of physics don't matter.
Right.
It's like, no, that's not what training does. So it's just, kind of supposed to be popcorny entertainment. I get that. But I feel like there are, that said, there still are some limits, right? Where I don't expect like Bucky to have a pet chinchilla that just like opens a can of whoop ass, right? Like
I would watch that.
It would be
yeah.
Bucky and the chinchilla. So I don't know, man. It's just that kind of compounded by this episode not really saying anything was a bit disappointing. So there's only 3 more episodes to go. Hopefully they can pick it up and finish strong and say something worth saying. But alas, it's not all been upward and onward since they started.
So like it's fewer episodes than WandaVision, but you've hit the episode 4 of this series.
Yeah,
is what you're telling me.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you let me know when Bucky and the Chinchilla premieres, and I'll be there with you, man. We'll go.
Okay. Thanks, brother.
Yeah, we'll be there. Okay. For me, I watched. Okay, so we'll pull back the veil here. It's been 2 weeks, I think, since we've recorded, Justin, and which is why you have a backlog of Falcon and Winter Soldier stuff. But I also have 2 things to quickly breeze through that I watched in a movie theater.
Oh my gosh, what is that?
Yeah, it's a movie theater is a place, and you go there and
Say no more.
You watch movies. Yeah, no, it was great. I've been dying to get back to the theater and see something, and it's slim pickings to say the least right now. But I did see, I will say, like one thumbs up experience and one thumbs sideways ? The first one is this new movie by the producer of all the John Wick movies. I haven't seen any of those because I thought they looked dumb. But if that's your thing, I guess, if like action and shooting people and Keanu Reeves with long gross hair beating people up is your jam, supposedly those are like good for what they are. It's that dude producing a movie in a similar vein, but with the star of this movie is Bob Odenkirk. And
yes.
yes. So I love Bob Odenkirk in everything.
Me too.
In everything, right? Like I love Mr. Show from back in the day with him and David Cross. Breaking Bad, he plays this like standout side character, and got turned into his own spin-off show, which should have never been a good idea, but is somehow, better than Breaking Bad when it's good. I think.
Yeah.
Better Call Saul. Bob Odenkirk just has this like commanding screen presence, but also this like normal dude like energy that makes him so much more compelling than like, a superhero or something. Cause he's like, usually he's that kind of archetype of a guy caught in a situation for which he should not be able to get out of. And he figures out squirrely ways, and it's fun to watch. He is charismatic, but also really sympathetic. And I don't know about you, Justin, but like watching Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, especially Better Call Saul, the character he develops on screen is so like diverse. Like you see the funniest stuff you've seen in a show, and also like he has to do like incredible dramatic, like hefty acting. I just can't, say enough about how great Bob Odenkirk is for me. He's my favorite wine vintage of a kind of actor, character actor, really, because he's not going to show up in something and be doing like some crazy accent in a wig. I don't feel like most of the time he's
only in Tim and Eric.
Yeah,
He's on a Tim and Eric awesome show.
Exactly, and that's all they do on Tim and Eric, or even Mr. Show is like the same kind of thing. But in this, he is an action star, and it's wild to see because this is sort of a boilerplate, like a spy operative kind of hitman for the government. He's, it's called Nobody because he's this guy who, if you look him up, like in the government database, he comes up as nobody. And if you see him, you don't have very long to live. Like he's this like freaking killing machine for all of the worst people in the world that the government doesn't want anyone to know, that they just kind of sweep under the rug. And he has been living this suburban pedestrian life for a while. And then he gets dragged back into this really ridiculous, kind of Russian gangster drug fueled scenario. And that sounds really bad, honestly. And I didn't expect to think this movie was good, but I don't know. I think what I told you, Justin, was I think I enjoyed this movie more than I should have, because it's like irresponsible plotting and irresponsible morality at times. But I will say, Bob Odenkirk, he just elevates material. It's what he does. And so he's really amazing in it. And he's legit. I'm telling you, he is Jason Bourne level, kick butt in this movie. I don't know how else to put it. Like, I'd never thought I would say this would be like taking, gosh, who's another character actor like him who's just like not physically imposing in a normal thing? Like
Jack Black.
Jack Black, yeah, like Jack Black, or like David Hyde Pierce from Frasier, right? Like some person who's like, they don't get by on physical prowess, they get by on wit and comedic timing and that kind of thing, and then they just make him like physically imposing somehow. So I will say this movie is really fun. It's also saying some stuff that maybe it doesn't dig deep enough, and that's sort of its main sin, if there is one. It's like it has too much fun with the shoot 'em up stuff, and it doesn't go deep every time it could. But I just don't think that was the intention. So I think it's successful. It's a successful endeavor for the filmmakers. I don't think I'll rewatch it a million times in my life, but I really enjoyed seeing that in a theater. Because it was in a theater, but also because the movie wasn't utter garbage. Speaking of utter garbage, Godzilla versus Kong, right? Which is like the big, quote unquote, big theatrical release right now. It's a blockbuster movie. It was released in theaters and on HBO Max. And this is like, okay, I don't really know the trajectory that well because I've only seen one of the new Godzilla or Kong movies, which is the... who's the guy who did Rogue One? Justin, help me.
Is it Gareth Edwards?
Gareth Edwards.
Yeah.
I saw his Godzilla. It has Bryan Cranston, Breaking Bad. And I think I told you I love everything in the first hour. And then when it becomes just Godzilla being shot at and destroying a city, it becomes a lot less interesting to me. So it was like kind of an okay movie. But really, like, I was hot and cold on certain parts of it. And then there was Kong Skull Island, I think, which is a King Kong movie, which I think is just kind of bananas, no pun intended. And then Godzilla King of Monsters, which everybody kind of hated. It was just another Godzilla movie, okay? This is like, Godzilla versus Kong. It's exactly what it sounds like. And the funniest thing about this movie to me is, first of all, I enjoyed it because I was sitting in a theater and I was in a Dolby theater, which is like better sound, better picture kind of a thing. And it was just like literally blasting my eardrums out of my skull. And it was great. Like, that's what I wanted. I just wanted to sit in a theater and have that theatrical experience again. This movie does not shoot above its pay grade as far as being smart or like trying to draw you in with really compelling characters or anything. But it's got great action sequences. It does some kind of crazy... the stuff in it that I liked was like the stuff in Ant-Man that like where they go subatomic or whatever. It gets a little weird, from time to time. That stuff works. But what I think is really funny about this is just people are starved. People are starved for like new movie in a theater, theatrical release, blockbuster, big thing. And the reviews on this are skewing so positive that I like literally the standard we've put up is, you know what, everybody? They set out to make a movie where Godzilla fights Kong and they succeeded. In making a movie where Godzilla fights Kong. It's like, well, yeah, I can't disagree with you, but it's just a dumb movie where monsters punch each other and stuff. And there's a mecha Godzilla, and it's crazy. So
I have a coworker that was very excited about this movie, and he prophesied, maybe you can, because of what you just said, it sounds like the conclusion's already foregone, but he said, I said, well, who's gonna win? This is before it came out. And he said, no, they're not going to win because they're going to upset the Kong people, are going to upset the Godzilla people. They're going to have to team up and fight a mech Godzilla. I was like, oh, okay, whatever. I don't know anything about this world.
Yeah.
So is that actually what happens?
Literally to a T. Yes. And I think you could probably, I didn't even watch a trailer for this movie. I was just like, this is what's playing. I'm going to a theater tonight. And If what it's trying to do is get people to cheer for the good monsters against the bad I guess it gets a thumbs up. It gets an A. It's whatever. Like whatever value there is in that. It's like professional wrestling level, like that's what it's bringing to the table. And so much so that there was a point at which a lady in the theater, like several rows from me because of distancing and all that, she was like, "Get up, Kong! Get up!"
Oh no!
And And normally when
And
people,
that lady was you.
yeah, normally in a theater, like I would be like, dude, shut up, don't talk in the movies. But this is literally what this movie is trying to get you to do. So
Right.
if
right.
if the barometer for success is those things, it made you yell for a CGI ape, it made you want to see one monster beat another monster, then hey.
Well, and isn't that, Travis, what people the reviews are probably more positive too, because this is a movie like we talked about before we started. This is a movie that demands to be seen in a theater-like setting.
Yeah.
And like it's just not the same to watch this at home. I mean that's true for any movie, right? I'm not trying to diminish and say like, more art house movies are somehow like better on your tablet. Everything's better in a theater.
Yeah.
But especially like you're talking about that lady having that, that cheering for her favorite monster. That is what makes seeing these things in a theater so special. I went to go see Rocky Balboa in the theater.
Yeah.
And it was like me and a bunch of dudes in hammer pants, which I didn't even realize people were still wearing. But it's because there's all these yoked monsters that are like in their 50s.
Yeah.
That, I mean, when they had the training montage for Rocky, these dudes were like on their feet, like doing push-ups in the aisle and like going bananas again. I'll use your word there.
Yes.
And that's just such a special experience. Like it would be totally ridiculous to be like, shut up, guys. Rocky's training. It's a time for like that kind of community and that kind of like, there's an energy in the room. And so even though, we may be 6 feet apart or whatever now in a movie theater, I don't know, it depends where you live probably. But that to have someone in there like, yes, get up, Godzilla or Kong or whoever, that's part of the magic that people want to feel that again, like that sense of like we are sharing this together.
Yep.
And I think that is what like that's how we're supposed to do life, but that's also what makes movies special.
Yes.
Is that there's something you do share and you discuss and you watch with each other, and there's a certain magic to that it's not the same as like to me like going to an art gallery.
No, absolutely. And that's why if you follow me on Letterboxd, which is the, social media platform where literally all you do is rate movies and you can write a review if you want to. It's just a movie tracking thing where you can log what you've watched. My review for Godzilla vs. Kong was 3 out of 5 stars. And I said, this literally earned a whole star because I got to watch it in a theater, and that's it. Not because it was 3 stars good, but because the 3rd star was literally just for that experience and that experience alone. It's good to have that back in our collective conscience, and I hope it just continues to return. Should we get into this other thing, which is from several years ago about World War II and some other monsters that the world had to... Okay. So we're really good at segues, and that's why we've landed ourselves into our intro section, which this week we get to talk about one of the quote-unquote greatest directors to bring anything to the silver screen, Charlie Chaplin. So we are discussing The Great Dictator from 1940. This is the first year of our 40s decade, and I think, Justin, for me, this is the first time I've watched all of The Great Dictator. I think I've seen clips before, and I definitely had a appreciation for Charlie Chaplin. And what about you?
First time I've seen the movie, and I think this is the first time I've seen a Chaplin film.
Okay.
So all new.
Okay, cool. So 1940, written, directed, starring Charlie Chaplin, which is how all of his movies pretty much were. I think there's a couple things of note here in the production history or whatever. Musical director Meredith Willson, which is a guy who didn't do a lot of film work. He wrote The Music Man, the Broadway musical that would go on to be a big deal for years and years and have revivals, and that's what he's most well known for. He did the composing and all the orchestration stuff for this. This is Charlie Chaplin's first true sound film. He was obviously famous for his silent stuff and his character, the Tramp, particularly, which he was a recurring character in many, many films. that you may or may not have seen or are aware of, City Lights and The Circus and all those. And this got Oscar nominations for Best Actor, Supporting Actor for the fellow who plays Napolini, the dictator of bacteria, and screenplay and music. So this would go on to be historically Charlie Chaplin's highest grossing film in his career. It would also go on to be his most polarizing, because this was sort of the decade where Charlie Chaplin went from becoming sort of enshrined as this silent film legend, this physical comedy legend, and this sort of auteur, right? Like writer, director, starred in all of his own stuff, to really, you can kind of chart his path downhill in popularity from the speech at the end of this movie, and then controversy surrounding, marriages to younger women and a bunch of other, non-movie related stuff. And this sort of begins the public persona decline, if you will, of Charlie Chaplin. So it's an interesting one to start the 40s off with. Any other intro information, Justin? I mean, there's some historical context that makes this, the thing that it is today.
Right. And I mean, again, like we said in the intro, Germany has, by the time this movie is released, taken over most of Europe, and they're just going to take more of it over in the next year. And, some of the stuff that has to do especially with, we'll just jump ahead here. This isn't quite intro, but just for context, I think it's worth noting. It wasn't a secret to most of the world that Jews were being, forced into ghettos or shipped off to concentration camps. But as is displayed in this movie, not, of course, that we would expect a Schindler's List kind of depiction of a concentration camp.
Right.
But we get a very sanitized, more like the prison camps we saw in The Grand Illusion from our 30s episode. It just looks like a normal kind of prisoner of war or like political dissident camp, where they like have blankets and they work and then they go to sleep and there's still a chance to escape. And I don't think the movie is doing that because the censors just couldn't handle the truth. I think it's because they didn't know really what the heck was really going on there. And so it's not Charlie Chaplin's fault because he didn't know. He's making this movie, partly because he's like, this is wrong. Are we out of our minds as a collective human race? Right. But to his credit and to the credit of the people that made this movie, or a credit to their humanity, I guess, or their morality, they couldn't even fathom that it would be worse than just the evil of falsely imprisoning people. They couldn't even fathom that it would just be gassing and torturing and doing all the heinous things that the Third Reich did to Jews. So it doesn't age well, but it's not really. I don't think you can hold that against this movie. That would be like kind of no good deed goes unpunished. Like, it's trying to shine a light. It's trying to be a call to arms and say, come on, people, let's get our heads out of the sand. We got to confront this. We got to do something about this. But it doesn't even quite know what it's confronting ultimately.
Yeah, I think the things that this spawned are numerous. I think you could argue, or you could write some long-winded essay about. But I mean, like, let's pick two examples that I think are pretty obvious. Dr. Strangelove, which is, a satirical send-up of just like, war hawk, militant mentality. And also Jojo Rabbit, which we've previously, at least in brief, discussed on this podcast, which is his own, it's its own depiction of Hitler, but through the eyes of a Hitler youth. And I think what those movies have in spades over something that came out in 1940 is freaking hindsight, right? Like, there's no way that, Taika Waititi would have gotten away with some of the same kind of, I won't even say, like, the jokes aren't the most, like, the jokes aren't the things that don't age well in this, because the jokes are all very like slapstick and, physical comedy, silent era carryover stuff. It's the frank nature, like you were saying, the frank nature with which these things are just said, like stormtroopers, concentration camps, painting Jew on a window. Like, in this movie, they're looking at it and he is, from a principled, moral ground, saying like, this is not good, this is bad, and he's attacking it in his own way, with satire, but it is 1940 after all. So I think you're right, and Charlie Chaplin himself would come out later in interviews and recognize that fact, blatantly, and say, this movie would not have been funny if I had made it, 2 or 3 years later. And it sort of just is what it is, from an artistic standpoint for all of that stuff. And for the rest of it, I think we need to transition into our meat and potatoes. I don't know. I had a nice hors d'oeuvre there. That history, delicious. That context, scintillating. Should we get into the main course here?
I need a fork.
So this movie, plot-wise, is an interesting one to me, Justin, and I think we'll get into our different takes on the movie. But basically, the way that this movie's structured is you have Charlie Chaplin at the helm, and he's playing two different characters. One of which is a normal dude who was fighting for we're gonna keep mixing up the stupid names, but the Tomanian army at the beginning of the film, and he's sort of an average Joe. He really is, they don't call him the tramp in this movie, but this is Charlie Chaplin's kind of stock character of like a goofy guy put into all kinds of situations, and this would go on to spawn a million things, like, the Three Stooges is a real common one. Buster Keaton did similar things. Regular guy, outstanding circumstances. So there's that one character, he's just kind of known as the Jewish barber. And then Hinkle, which is Adenoid Hinkle, which is the Adolf Hitler analog in this movie, the parody version. And throughout the movie, we see, Hinkle doing Hitler-esque things, and we see the Jewish barber in a Jewish ghetto, sort of the other side of the coin, if you will. And the plot doesn't move, like some giant cruiser in the ocean from one spot to another, but essentially you see Hitler planning, an invasion, and then at the end you see that invasion take place. That's the gist of the plot of the film. So Charlie Chaplin stars as those two characters, and then his love interest Hannah is the sort of scullery maid, kind of just working woman that he falls in love with. And then we have a bunch of other crazy nutso people. Jack Oakey plays Napolini, who is obviously a Mussolini, send up. And then there's a bunch of, I almost said German, Tomanian people underneath Hinkle. We have Schultz, we have Garbage, and we have Herring. So the whole movie, Justin, is very, very silly. I would argue,
Yep.
Through and through, every scene is trying to get some kind of laugh, with the exception of the last speech. So how did this whole thing strike you? What did you think?
Well, it definitely hit different notes, some of which would be expected. It starts out in World War I, where the Jewish barber is just a private in the Tomanian army, or field artillery or whatever, and there's some silliness that happens, and it's really it sets a tone that is maybe not consistent throughout the movie. I would say that first segment that takes place all in 1918 or whatever is it's just very silly. He is there's the dud shell from their Big Bertha field artillery piece, is chasing him sort of as he's trying to, defuse it.
Right.
And what I did like about this movie is that Charlie Chaplin is not like the funny guy and everyone else is a straight man. Anybody can be ridiculed in this movie and made a part of the comedy. Whether that's some of the other soldiers who are, everyone, the commander's like, go check that shell. And then someone turns around, you go check that shell, check that shell. And then it comes down to Chaplin's character,
Yeah.
So I like that Chaplin, uses the whole ensemble. The whole cast can be used for comedic effect, which when that is used, I think often it does work really well. So that whole scene, and then, he's like rescuing this, or gonna help this pilot, Commander Schultz, And then they just have this really ridiculous, like they're flying the plane upside down, and Charlie Chaplin's character is too stupid to realize that's what's happening.
Yeah.
And then they crash and survive, which makes little sense.
Yep.
But they do. They crash their airplane, and they're both fine. So it, as it goes on, then I would say that's pretty consistent, and I enjoyed those first 10 minutes or whatever. And then it's later learned that he has some kind of amnesia. He can't remember anything. He still thinks maybe it is 1918 or something. So he doesn't know anything about Hinkle. He doesn't know anything about Jews being persecuted in his beloved Tomania. So he kind of comes back and is reconciled with these kind of, the Tomania that he sort of went to sleep in and the one that he woke up in, which is a great concept, I think. I will say, I'll put myself out there. I quickly learned I wasn't really sure this movie can turn on a dime when it's like time to laugh and time to not, and to me it was not always clear until it was too late. So, for example, the first time I think that the barber is confronted by stormtroopers, he doesn't really know what's going on.
Right.
And there is something silly that has preceded the stormtroopers' arrival. So it's like, ha ha ha, whatever, I don't remember what the bit is. And then the stormtroopers come around the corner, like singing one of their stupid songs, the Airy, 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 Aryan.
Yeah.
Like, which is just, it's kind of funny. And one of them just, like, they're swinging their batons like lunatics, and one of them just breaks a window, like you can't even tell if it's on purpose. So I thought that was funny, but then immediately they just start to drag Jewish people out into the street and, like, turn over their carts, and it's like, oh, it's not funny all of a sudden, right? Which is kind of, if you're trying to make a point, which maybe Chaplin is. I'm not Chaplin, and he's not here with me right now, so I can ask him. But that is kind of, for people that want to embrace such a nationalistic, such a fiercely racist kind of ideology, in their naivety, I'm talking about not the people that propagate this crap, but people that fall under the spell of it, who may otherwise be normal people, but who buy into the lie. I think it is all fun and games until one day, there's that line in Jojo Rabbit, like, you're not a Nazi, you just want to wear a cool uniform and be a part of a club. And so I think that if that is trying to make a point, it's that you could make the argument, I think, that it's intentional, that it flips without letting you know that it's flipping. And that's to say, yeah, it is all like we're just singing songs and breaking stuff, but also we're going to murder people, and which they try to do. And then it's not fun and games anymore. It's real. And so to me, that there is a delicate balance that you have to juggle, I think, as a director, as a filmmaker. And to me, that balance is not, although it does become more clear, like, okay, when they're trying to hang the barber with a noose off a lamppost, that's obviously not funny. But then it's, like a couple minutes after that, his old friend Schultz has come back and recognizes him and saves him because he's a friend. And then Hannah drops like a piece of tile or something from the roof and crashes it on the head of one stormtrooper, and Schultz is like, well, who did that? And Chaplin's character says, oh, a friend, and they laugh, ha ha ha. So it's so many of those turns for me are so close together that it becomes hard to, like, it becomes like exercising almost, like, okay, don't laugh. Yes, now we're serious. Okay, no, that is funny. So I'm not sure that the movie is quite as much of a success in those regards. Because those kind of tonal elements are kind of jam-packed in some cases, really close together for me.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I could be alone in that. Did you get any whiff of that at all?
So I think I don't think you're wrong. Like, I think that there's some really clear juxtaposition in here. Like the fact that Charlie Chaplin worked on this script for 2 years and then made this movie, and it came out in 1940. Like, he was so principled and like fervent about saying what he was saying here. And I think the art form he knows is slapstick. It's just like, it's what he lives and breathes. It's what he's great at. You know what I mean? It's like what makes everything that he's ever done really, it's just a cut above everything else that was around it at the time. So in this movie, I think what you're forced to reckon with is the idea that like, and this is why it was, controversial and polarizing, that especially that speech at the end. This is Charlie Chaplin. This is our Steve Martin, our Jim Carrey, our, Jack Black, if you will, our physical comedian who I don't pay movie money. I don't pay I don't pay ticket fee to see this person lecture me on politics. And he's telling you, like, I'm using what I know to do exactly that. And if there's any question about it, just watch the last 5 minutes, right? Like there's no doubt. And it's not just about politics, it's about morality and, the value of human life and not being, like you said, racist and nationalist and all that stuff. But I think for me, I did not, I guess I didn't find myself exhausted by those switches because it feels consistently blended throughout. Like every one of those bits that makes a turn from ridiculous slapstick physical humor into making you come face to face with at least what they knew at 1940 as the horrors of what this is, even though the scope of that wasn't really known. The turns that are in there it's Chaplin saying to the audience, or at least this is how I read it, saying to me, like, you're laughing, but here's the real deal. Here's the real deal. And for me, I find that to me, it worked because he's so good at what he does. Like comedy is subjective, right? So like you can look at something, any person can look at something and it could just not make you laugh. You could say that's not funny, and I'm sure there were moments like that in this movie while you were watching it, and I might look at those exact same moments and be laughing, and that is what it is. That's just comedy, some things that make us laugh make no one else laugh, and that's why they don't make it through the final edit, and you don't ever hear them, people. But the way that this movie works is like if you buy into his depiction of Hitler, right? Hinkle. If you buy into Hinkle, I think you buy into this idea that like we as artists, or at least him as an artist, he is doing what he can from his position of influence to disarm something truly evil by deflating it, by using satire and comedy to bring it down from this otherworldly level down to this is something that is evil, but this person is inherently ridiculous in their pontificating, in their pride, in their searching for power and whatever. And if you can laugh at it, then you might be able to defeat it. You know what I mean? I feel like that sentiment, it just permeates the whole thing. And that's why for me, everything here works pretty well up until the last speech. And that's where, I mean, I'm sure we will find some common ground there, Justin, but like the last speech is the controversial part because it's just so out of place. It's just so out of form for the rest of the movie. But we should probably take a minute to talk about Hinkle because he is the only thing that people, center around in this. It's like the Jewish barber, the tramp character is, it's Charlie Chaplin. It's what you expect in a lot of ways. The Hinkle character was what people lined up and made this his most profitable movie for, because it's like, we're going to watch Charlie Chaplin play Hitler, essentially. And this depiction of Hitler, known here as Hinkle, is flamboyant and in many ways like effeminate. It's like the opposite of how Hitler postured himself as like this dominant, ultra masculine, not just those things, but obviously like of the superior race and all those things. And in this movie, he says like he was, and he depicts that person as really behind the scenes, just like bumbling. And even in the way he speaks, right? Like I love the ridiculous German that Charlie Chaplin spins in this movie, where like as soon as he starts talking, you're like, is Charlie Chaplin going to speak German? Okay, that's not German. It's like Wiener Schnitzel, Weidenschneit. It's just utter nonsense. And I couldn't help but see, like Peter Sellers and again, Jim Carrey and Steve Martin, like they must all look at this performance and say like, that is the ridiculousness that I'm searching for in A, B, or C role. It goes down to really important details that you could tell Chaplin put in put in place on set, like with great specificity. He has a file cabinet behind him in his office as the dictator that opens up, and it's not a file cabinet. It's just a whole bunch of mirrors that he can like look at himself in, So it's this vanity thing. He does ridiculous things, like he kisses people's earlobes, It's like, so if you can look at this within the context of like, this is 1940 and Hitler was certainly scary. I don't think Chaplin was trying to say something other than that Hitler is scary, but I think he's trying to do his level best here to disarm that fear, to disarm that, like, this is an unbeatable evil, by saying, like, if we can laugh at something, if we can take away that little bit of power we've given to it by just fearing it, then maybe we can do something about it. I don't know. That's how I took the Hinkle representation. What about you?
Yeah, oddly, I think this movie was banned in Germany. I can't quite figure that out.
Yeah,
but I really enjoyed a lot of the silliness with Hinkle. I enjoy when him and Herring just have this argument, like when Herring bumps into him, and it essentially what they just repeat to one another is banana, 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 cheese and crackers. It just makes little sense.
He says cheesy ravioli at one point. He called, like, as an insult, which is kind of amazing.
Well, and I enjoy how I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but when Hinkle is talking to Napoleone,
yeah,
and apparently the only thing that makes Napoleone Italian is that he puts into things. Hey, where is my spaghetti? It's like, and Jack Oakey, the guy that plays Napoleon, doesn't even try for an Italian accent, which is great. No, not that he should, it makes it very much.
I think we've brushed on that idea of, like, do you do the accent? Do you do the original language? And this may be, Justin, the genesis of the, like, just do your thing on screen.
Right.
And it's parody, so you get away with it more, but it is that for sure.
No, this movie gets away with a lot, I think, because of its genre, where you don't even care. Like, so many anachronisms or things that just don't make sense. Like, okay, so Tomania is a made-up country, so I guess you could argue that. But I mean, Tomania is a thinly veiled Germany, right? Based on uniforms and the double cross symbol, which is an obvious stand-in for the swastika. There's like ridiculousness of like German or Tomanian soldiers running around with American rifles from the Spanish-American War. It's
right.
Like, what is going on? But it doesn't really matter in this movie because it's so not trying to be a historical drama of any kind. So yeah, I did, going back to Hinkle, I did enjoy a lot of the silliness. I did get a little bit of, and this is not necessarily just related to Hinkle, and I think I may be alone in this, but hopefully not alone in the universe, just alone in our own conversation right now, where I found a lot of the stuff funny, whether that's his accent or his physical comedy. Like with the balloon, popping the globe, which is such a great an analogy, really, or metaphor for what Hitler is. He's playing with fire, and it does, his own house does crash around him mercifully in real life. But it's interesting to me that segment for me, plus the segment in the beginning and in World War I era, very much seems to me that Mr. Chaplin is holding on deeply to the skills he has honed as a silent film director.
Yeah.
And to me, those pieces, I mean, they hardly have any talky sort of sound to begin with, but they exist in their own little world. It's like, and I don't necessarily mean tonally so much as like they could be plucked out of a silent film movie. And they're just very, very, like, where he's just bouncing the globe, like, off of his butt or off of, his head or whatever. Like, it's just all very silly, and it really means nothing for plot unless you want to stretch and say it's a metaphor for him, thinking the world is his oyster, which, yeah, okay, you can make that argument, I think. That's fine.
Yeah.
But it's still mesmerizing to watch. It's just, it's kind of hypnotic. At least it was for me, because I woke up 7 centuries later and was dead. But once I time traveled back, I came to our conversation here. Be that as it may, those are things that are just interesting to note to me, but they're still strong, and they stand on their own, and I don't have a problem with them being in the movie. But a lot of that stuff for me, it goes on a little too long. It overstays its welcome. This is kind of a longer movie, a little over 2 hours, I think. And for my money, you could have shaved some time off of that. I know it's probably pretty heretical given the pedigree that this movie is supposedly or through consensus of a certain caliber. But to me, it's we talked about the Three Stooges, or you mentioned them earlier. They get in and get out. Their movies are obviously wildly different, although they do make fun of Hitler too quite a bit.
Right.
It's like 17 minutes or something, right? And so it's very, like we talked about the Pink Panther in the Heist series. It feels like if you took out some of those Pink Panther movies, just take the good Clouseau stuff, and you've got essentially a Three Stooges length short film,
right,
of what's actually funny, and that's probably all that was worth doing. I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination this movie overstays its welcome and is really only 17 minutes of funny or something like that. But I do think there's something to be said for when a person like Charlie Chaplin. And Charlie Chaplin's given a leash, and he has his own company. Like, he's not really beholden to many people, right?
Yeah, he personally financed this. Like, I think it was like a $2 million budget, which was a lot in 1940.
Which is good and bad, right? It's great for other people like George Lucas with the first Star Wars and with Empire Strikes Back. I'm really happy that he had full control of those things. Not so happy that he had full control of the Phantom Menace. And this is Charlie Chaplin when he's getting. He's not an old man, but he's not what he was in 1915 when he kind of started in silent films either. And so I wonder if this might have been a different movie for the better. And I'm not coming after this as someone who thinks this is a bad movie, but I see this as a movie that possibly could have been better if there was someone involved that said, hey, Mr. Chaplin, what about this?
Yeah.
Not, hey, what about we make Hinkle talk English the whole time or something, I'm not talking about taking away anything that works, but just, especially as far as condensing things, or as like, hey, I don't know if we need to spend 5 minutes on that bit. What if we go half? What if we go 3 minutes? But, we're never going to know the answer to that. It's not super helpful for me to put the hypothetical out there. But that is what that's kind of what I came away with at the end of this movie after I had processed the last 5 minutes. That is,
yeah, I think it lives in a weird space, similarly to Gone with the Wind being one of the first big color movies, and M being one of the very first movies to use sound at all. This is Chaplin's first speaking film, and again, I think he kind of begrudgingly made it a speaking film because he just knew and loved and lived and breathed silent film, silent comedy. So there's gonna be some growing pains there, right? It's like silent film actors who pop up in talkies and they're doing this crazy face acting that they had to do to communicate before, and now it's like, dude, you can use your mouth, and maybe some of those sequence lengths, maybe a decade later in the 50s, if this was coming out then. Maybe they shorten themselves, via the editing room or the director or whatever. I think that's a good observation. I think there's something to be said there. I do think I noticed a couple things that I thought he does, for better or for worse, use sound, and it's sometimes for better. He uses sound to great comedic effect sometimes. I love the ridiculous German he uses when he, speaks as Hinkle giving a speech, in the Hitler cadence. It's this crazy caricature version, but it's also he uses it Dyson Feisen, Venus Schnitzel, and he just uses weird guttural noises to make fun of the way German sounds. At least it's angry, screaming Hitler German. And the audience applauds, they're applauding perfectly, and then he puts his hand up and they silence. We see that kind of timing in modern stuff, where it's they use similar techniques now. I think this is ultimately a movie of sequences because it comes from a guy who made movies that were sequences. Silent films largely, they do, the good ones tell an overarching story, and there's character development and there's pathos, and that's what made Charlie Chaplin into the star that he was. But I think I love almost all of the individual sequences for physical comedy's sake. But the one that stands out to me, and Justin, I don't know how you felt about this sequence, but like my favorite moments in the whole movie are the pudding eating sequence, like where they're trying to find the coin in the pudding. And you're right, you're right, because like this doesn't need talking. You know what I mean? Like this could just be like organ music and title cards and this happening, and it could work just as well. But I laughed harder at that than anything else in the movie. And I'll tell you what, I had my 7-year-old daughter. She woke up from her nap and I was finishing this thing, and she came out and I was like, yeah, sure, you can watch this, whatever. It's, most things from 1940 are reasonably safe for a kid of that age if you're worried about traumatizing them or whatever.
Right.
And she woke up right during this sequence and she was busting a gut, man. It was like, this translated perfectly to me and her. Two very different people in different stages of life, of just this idea of like no one wants to do it, so they're all passing the coin from one plate to another, and at the end he's like coughing up all the coins.
Yeah.
There's just some really delightful like stuff that, whether or not every person is going to sit down and enjoy this movie, that's just not going to happen. You know what I mean? Like, I understand the controversy here. I get that. And I also understand, my take and your take. I came into this already loving Charlie Chaplin, and you came into this, loving this style of comedy, but this is your first Chaplin. And it's kind of a weird first Chaplin, honestly. I mean, because it's doing not just that one thing. It's also jamming in these really serious things. And that sequence worked for me. Were there any particular sequences? I know you said the globe thing kind of transfixed you. I think that's a great sequence too. The minute he picks that globe up and it's a balloon, I was like, oh man, that's just brilliant. Like, you don't think that until he touches it, and then it's weightless, and then he just, it's like this weird dance sequence with a globe that I don't know why I found it compelling, but I also did. What other sequences kind of stood out to you as particularly successful?
Well, I'll do two. I don't know that one is super successful for what it sets out to do, but it's not even a sequence. It's more like a short gag, but it's so brilliant and copied so much. And Chaplin probably didn't come up with it, but he's dictating to his secretary, and so he's Affenstaschen Glieben Lauden, whatever, and then she types like 7 letters, and he looks at her like, okay. And then he looks over her shoulder at the typewriter, and then says, something like "Verblauten," and then she just like keeps typing and 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 typing. It's so stupid, but it works, man. Just that really that's not a joke where you need Hitler to make it, or
it's his face. His face, like watching her type, is that's the punchline there.
Yeah, exactly. And so the second sequence, which you called it controversial, and I kind of get why it is, but sort of not. Also, the last 5 minutes. So the barber gets mistaken for Hinkle because they both have the same toothbrush mustache, essentially, and I mean they're the same actor, so it'd be pretty hard not to mistake.
And there is I don't know what you felt about that title card at the beginning, but it gave me a chuckle. Yeah, any resemblance between Hinkle, the dictator, and the Jewish barber is purely coincidental.
Yeah, that was genius. So anyway, he gets mistaken for Hinkle, and he is essentially rushed off to a stage on this country that Tomania has just invaded to give this long-awaited speech. So he walks up to the platform, and Schultz, who's kind of, going along with him, unwillingly, they're trying to like fake the funk. And he stands up and gives this great speech that is not just great for this movie, but is great for 1940 too. It's just it's the cry of the free world, and for me, really, I mean it's from a different movie, right? But 1940 is a different year, and I mean, hey, for such a time as this, you've been born. Charlie Chaplin and Adolf Hitler apparently almost had the same birthday. So, I mean, it's a little bit fortuitous that they had, they look a little similar too, albeit if it's just, if you took the mustache away, maybe they don't. I don't know.
But it is a weird mustache choice.
It is, yeah. And it's a shame that Hitler ruined it for everyone because it's really goofy, but now it just looks really evil in our history books. I'm really okay with this being in this movie because I don't know why it would be controversial. You talked about, some people not wanting, Jim Carrey to tell you, whatever. And I get that. That's not, if I have any qualms with that movie, it's definitely not that. Because you're talking about a dude that is trampling over the world stage, and he is playing with the world like the balloon. I would do what I can too. I can't say I can fault Charlie for saying, forget it. Whatever. I'm just going to give an impassioned treatise for what I think the world should be doing right now. And I think it gets away with it, even though tonally it's definitely in a different movie, but it's not in a different universe. So he is, that there is. I've heard some people say it's like, and it's fine if people believe this. For me, it didn't strike me as like him breaking the fourth wall and being Charlie Chaplin saying this. It struck me as still being in the context of the movie that the barber is like, even though he has shown zero ability to communicate like this in the movie before, it's supernatural. Before we started recording, I said it was kind of Lynchian, like David Lynch. It just makes it makes sense on a different level, where this guy is just like, oh, I have the stage, I have to say something. Okay, let me just give you God's truth right now.
Right.
It's not anything new. It's very commonsensical, especially with hindsight, like we mentioned earlier. But it's so impassioned, and it just seems so clearly like this just comes from the heart of someone that is bleeding for the world and for the right reasons, that I can't. And it transitions into this thing where he like calls out to Hannah,
right?
And she's like in the vineyard somewhere, and again, like Lynch, they had been accosted by stormtroopers and they were beating them up and ready to take them to jail. But when you go back to Hannah, suddenly they're all gone,
right?
And to me, that makes sense in a very Lynchian way. Like, well, of course they'd be gone because he's speaking and they know to leave. Like it does not make sense in like a classic way of understanding plot, but it makes sense in a, like, if you're down with Twin Peaks, to me that's the same logic that you have to apply, because it suddenly is playing by those rules even though it hasn't before,
right?
And Hannah looks up like to the heavens, we'll quote Frasier there, and she's like, listen. And I think the sound that we're listening for is not the barber's speech, but of just the peace. There's no sound. There's nothing going on. And I think what we're hearing is just that sense of, that's what's worth fighting for. That's what's worth doing the right thing for. Who doesn't have the right just to be in their vineyard and listen to the birds sing in the midday sun? I think that's all that is trying to say. And so I mean, that's the last like shot of the movie. And so when that closed, I thought, oh, okay, I'm fine with those 5 minutes, and they were, frankly, probably because partly they're so like kind of out of left field. There's really compelling, but I mean, to me, it doesn't work because the movie is a comedy and then just does a hard shift. Like, actually, it's not even a gear shift, Travis. They like got out of the car like Dukes of Hazzard style and got in a go-kart, and they were like, this is what we're doing now. And it's like, whoa, okay. It's really unexpected. But again, like, because of the time that this was made and the message that he's trying to convey, I mean, I think there's a reason that former President Franklin Delano Roosevelt invited Chaplin to read this speech at his inauguration.
Right.
Because it's, like, that's what the world needed to hear then, I think. So it is bizarre, but at least for my money, I didn't think like, oh, I wish this movie didn't have that. But what about you?
Yeah, I wish this movie didn't have that.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, but not because I think I disagree with anything else you said. I just think, like, as a pure, like, if art can do good, right? Like, if a movie like this can do good in the grand scheme of things, I think it does better if if it remains consistent in its approach and its strategy and its form, whatever. So like you look at this and say it doesn't belong in this movie, but you like it essentially. And I look at this and I say it doesn't belong in this movie, and I think that it's not that I don't want Charlie Chaplin to give me his, opinions on the world of morality or politics. I think you kind of invite that into your life when you watch anyone's movie. But I absorb this movie as effective on those means throughout. Like from scene one to the end, aside from the speech, the pure satire of like taking something that is objectively wrong, morally, just reprehensible, and making fun of it because it is wrong, not because it's inherently funny, but because it's wrong. That works to me. Like that is satire at its purest form. It's like we can do good by making jokes. It is possible. And when he does this speech at the end, and he, in my mind, he breaks the fourth wall, like you said, the plot fades away, the consequences of any decisions fade away because no one tries to tackle him when he's trying to, speak, espouse values that are the opposite of what Hinkle has been saying, or, someone realizes this isn't him, this is someone who looks like whatever, like anything like that. None of that happens. It's just a departure from what I think already worked. And so maybe our takeaways from the speech are just more about our takeaways from the bulk of the movie. So like if you think it was like hit and miss, then this is going to be, more of maybe what needed to happen to make it more hit. And in my mind, it was working. And so that's why the speech, it's out of left field, but it's not necessarily for the better. I'll bring it back to our old buddy, Roger Ebert. He wrote about The Great Dictator, and his words are, it's fatal when Chaplin drops his comic persona, abruptly changes the tone of the film, and leaves us wondering how long he is going to talk, a question that should never arise during a comedy. Almost like what you said, Justin, bits going on too long. The movie plays like a comedy followed by an editorial. And I think to me, it's more about the form. You know what I mean? Like if comedy is effective in this thing that it's trying to do, you don't need to tack on an editorial to make it work. And while I don't disagree with anything that Chaplin was saying, it's not like, I don't like what he's saying. And I don't like when celebrities, talk about, real world issues. It's like people can say things. I don't care about that. I just think like it's a little bit of an artistic bummer that he didn't trust what he was already doing. That's almost my takeaway of the last sequence. But overall, this is a really good like encapsulation of just like, if you want to know what satire is or can be, I mean, Chaplin shows you here. And I think we tried to get into the nuts and bolts of it, and I will just say before we move into our final section, I like all the supporting characters. I think everybody's good. I don't have any particular like excellent highlights. I think Hannah's good. I think Mr. Jekyll is good, and everybody else who gets real dialogue whenever, like, nobody's bad in this movie. But it's more of a question of tone and if they succeeded in what they were doing. Wouldn't you say, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, that is not what, to the credit of everyone involved in this movie, that is not what makes or breaks this movie, and I think that's because everyone is cast really well and directed very phenomenally. There's no, I mean, I kind of have very little to say, because that's just that is one thing that consistently works in this movie.
Yeah. All right, well, let's wrap it up in our last section, which we call, Is It Worth Your Time? This might be a tougher one to answer this week, maybe more than most weeks, Justin, because it's about hindsight. It's about kind of the mixed bag that you're getting. It's purposeful juxtaposition on Charlie Chaplin's part. For my money, and then I'll let you have the last word. I think this is really, I mean, whether you whether you loved every minute of it or thought like every minute of it worked, I do think like most people who care about film, who want to know more about the trajectory of cinema and its effect on the culture and all that, like you got to watch it. You absolutely should watch it, at least once. For our key question of how often would I rewatch this, it really fires on all cylinders for me. Like I love Chaplin at his physical, peak here, in a lot of ways, using just like the scenery and himself. Like he's just so acutely aware of like what he can make funny. He does things with, a comb and a bar of soap and his own feet and his hat and like just those really basic building blocks of what made him what he was to get to the point of 1940 making The Great Dictator. I do think this movie says a lot of really, I think, obvious things. That's why we didn't get into, I think, a lot of the philosophical, what can we read into this? Well, it's kind of on the nose. You know what I mean? It's like Hitler is bad. Hating Jews is a terrible, terrible way to view the world, and it's terrible. Don't do it. All that stuff is there for you, albeit kind of spoon-fed. So I think that was kind of the point. So it's a success for me. I would rewatch this, not every year. It's not like, I think anything World War II related, anything that even hints at the Holocaust, even though this isn't really like aware of the Holocaust proper, it's just aware of what was leading to it almost. It's not going to be palatable like super often, but I will watch this probably a few more times in my life, maybe once every 5 years or so, to kind of just brush up on like what really sunk in for me. What about you, Justin?
Well, supposedly, Mr. Charlie had this sent off to the Fuhrer himself, and supposedly he watched it. And according to at least one source, he watched it twice.
Huh.
So I would say this is a movie not because anyone wants to be like Hitler, but because it's kind of complex. Maybe not in a good way, not like a pretentious Christopher Nolan movie or something where it's like, what did I just watch?
Mm-hmm.
But because there's some contradictions. It's juxtaposed.
It's juxtaposed.
Because it's that. I think you have to at least watch this movie twice, and I would like to watch it at least one more time. I would like to do that maybe before 5 years are up. I don't know if I would wait that long, just because I want to. It's a unique movie. It's made by a guy that had his heyday in the silent film era, and kind of didn't want to come out of it, and that kind of shows. But he's obviously freakishly talented at what he does. So yes, I would watch this movie again. My time frame is wide open. I'm going to say before World War III, I'd like to watch this movie. So, yeah, definitely worth your time. And like you said, Travis, I would agree. This is an important part of cinema history, so if that means a quarter to you, put it in the gumdrop machine and get your gumdrop. That analogy made little sense. But there you go.
Well, the gumdrop for next week, Justin, is a very, very different gumdrop, let me tell you. Meow. Yes. Okay, it's not Cats 2019. It's not, so don't worry, people. This is a movie from 1942 called Cat People, which is, I think, a really important movie for like the trajectory of horror as a whole. I've never seen it, Justin. Have you?
No, and I'm excited. I watched the original trailer last night, and my mouth is watering.
Looks good. See you next week.
Let the movie speak.
Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
Hey, since you're still here and still listening, thank you, by the way, we'd like to ask an additional favor of you.
We have social media. It's a thing on the internet, and all you need to do is find us on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook and like and subscribe. I know this is annoying, but we have to ask you because we want more people to hear the show. In addition to that, if you could rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, we would greatly appreciate it. See you next week. Bye.